Alright, so I've been doing more work here. I couldn't make a video till now because I had people in the shop being noisy and stuff. Starting to wire in my 6LS box. So it's got nice little labels on everything. If we can see this one, it says cylinder 2468. So everything's labeled, which is nice. There's one for the map sensor, which I'm not using because this is a race only version. If I was running this on the street, you have a map sensor hooked up to do your vacuum advanced kind of timing curve. So I got the crank sensor hooked up down there, cam sensor, which is down in that mess. And then I need to run these wires to a ground, this one to an ignition power source, and I got a little yellow one over here, which is going to go to my tach. So those are the three wires you got to hook up to make this box run. Well, you don't really need to do the tach. That's if you have a tach, you can run that. That's it. Ground, power, and you plug in the needed sensors and stuff. That's all it takes to make this engine run. So there is an optional one here, which is this set of wires. And what this is for is my rev limiters. I can have a two-step and a top rev limiter as well. So I'm going to set that up too. Set it on a two-step off the foot brake, I think, for when I want to stall the car up and leave. And instead of just guessing and watching the tach, it'll save me a bit of time. Just have it hooked up to the brake pedal and a switch. So hit the brake pedal and I can run it up to the two-step where it'll sit all the time and launch, make my launches a lot more consistent. So there we go. Doing some wiring and stuff. I'm soldering everything, shrink tubing everything. Haven't done a whole pile of wiring in here yet, just doing the 6LS box. And then I got a bunch of wires, other wires run here. This one is going to go to the alternator for an alternator signal. I got a couple on the other side, which is for the water pump and the electric fan. So I got to wire that stuff up and then try and fit my alternator in here. I'm going to make some phone calls to see if I can get a temporary outlet for this, because the proper one isn't going to be here till probably Monday or Tuesday. These fittings should be here hopefully tomorrow. My AN fittings for these. So hopefully I can get everything just a little bit buttoned up. Tomorrow hopefully everything else can come in and it'll be a couple hours tomorrow and then the car's ready to go. So hopefully I can work it like that, but here's hoping. Alright, so yes, time to get to some more wiring. I got a power wire to go, which before we had an HEI distributor in here, so I'm going to find that wire that put 12 volts to the HEI. That was an ignition on. We had a wire going from the HEI distributor to my tach, so I'll find that wire and hook it to there. And then ground. I got a nice little spot on the back of the engine block. I'm going to ground that. I'm going to hook this big ground cable here probably to this little spot in this nice aluminum bracket, because if I move my alternator down low, this hole is going to be sitting there useless, so it might as well be a really nice ground. So there we go. That's what I got planned for right now. I might as well get busy. I got the starter in. I got the mufflers put on. I was doing that while everybody was talking and being noisy. So that's a little bit closer underneath there. And I don't know if I showed you guys the mufflers from last time, but they're not very long. I got some pictures I'll throw up. So now you've seen those. Yeah, so I'm gonna get busy here doing some wiring and try and mount that alternator and get some things buttoned up here again, and we'll go from there. So there we go, got some messy wiring, but everything's hooked up and works. Well, should work when I get power to it. Like I said, this wire, I went to the old ignition for the HEI distributor, used to be in here. That one went right to the tach. These two down on the block. In theory, I should be able to hook my batteries back up and fire that engine, make it make some noise. Some problems with that though right now. One, we don't have any water in it. So if I did fire it, it could be for a couple of seconds, so I didn't cook anything. Two, I have no oil in it. Three, I have no oil in the transmission. So we're gonna hold off on that a little bit. I'm gonna try now and start doing some playing and figuring and see if I can get that alternator mounted down there somehow. I'll have to custom make a bracket, so there's gonna be some cutting, some welding, you know. It goes that way sometimes. So yeah, we'll give that a shot. And it's getting a little later in the day. Wiring always takes some time. Still got that wire hanging there for the alternator. This wiring, trust me, is gonna get a lot better. I don't know if I've mentioned this before. I do have a painless wiring harness to put into this car. I'm gonna have to do that pretty soon here because this wiring is pissing me off. It's disgusting. But right now, it's get it running so that I can have this thing going for the first event. In between the first and second events, I should be able to have a little bit of downtime where hopefully maybe I can rip the wiring out of the car and redo it all. Have a little bit of time here and there. So yeah, that's where we're sitting right now. So I'm gonna lift this car back up in the air and go from underneath and see where I can get that alternator mounted. All right, well, I'll see you in a little bit. All right, so feeling everything around in there with the alternator. I pulled the bracket back off. I had to clock the alternator differently. And what that means is, I made a line that used to line up right across here. I pulled out the 4 bolts for the alternator that hold it together. These little female Torx, or male, yeah, female Torx. And then you be very gentle with a little hammer, and you can tap the front half of the case off of the stator. Not completely off, just enough to make it loose so that you can turn it. And the reason for marking it is so you know whether you're going to turn it a quarter turn or a half turn like I did. There's one mark, there's the other mark. I went a half a turn, figured that would put this and this in way better locations. So something to keep in mind, all your electronics and gizmos and stuff are in the back of the alternator. They're all wired to the stator, and so you can 90% of the time you can take the front off, loosen the front, tap it off the stator, and you can clock it. So it has to be done occasionally when you're putting an alternator into a vehicle. Not very often these days. They usually have everything marked so they're clocked properly for every vehicle. But when you got a custom application, something going where it's not supposed to go, sometimes you just got to make it work. All right, so there we go. I'm going to put this bracket back on there now, and we're going to go retest fit in the car again. All right, so it worked a lot better. The alternator stud is now back over here, closer to the motor mount, where I have quite a bit more room. Before, it was over here and rubbing on the frame. So that's never a good idea for something that's always hot. These wires, a little bit tighter, but I still have room for them. If I ever have to change the alternator, I'll just have to pull this bolt out first and then take the plug out, because that plug's kind of tucked in there. So there we go. It will work that way. Glad to see that. So now I'm just going to have to form a little bracket for the bottom there. And I'm also going to have to pull this spacer out and drill and tap this hole a little higher. Because right now, the way it sits right there, I'm going to have some idler arm issues going into the bottom of it. So if I can move it up just to the top here, right in the center there, then I should have some clearance and we'll be good to go. I probably could move it even higher yet if I wanted to, depending on other stuff. But the higher I move it, the more I move it away from where I'm going to bolt to. So yeah, down there I'm going to have to make a custom little bracket. So there we go. I'm going to pull all this stuff back off again so I can drill and tap that hole. And yeah, there we go. I will start taking that apart. Alright, so to make these alternators work on a non-computer controlled vehicle, what you need to do is this wire here, the gray one, which is on the right hand side of the plug, or the left hand, you know, one of those hands. This wire here, you have to attach about right around a 550 ohm draw. This one, you just write to 12 volts, ignition on. That's where our alternator lead here comes in, and that's where these come in. I had to use 2 resistors, twist them together to get the resistance I need. So now I'm going to solder that in there. I'm going to attach another wire to this. I will attach them both together and then go to that wire. So that's how you make these things charge. Without a computer, it needs to see some kind of a draw on the sense wire, and then this one is the field wire, so it just needs the 12 volts to make it excite. And there we go. So you learned something a little bit. That's what I had to do on the Camaro. It got really expensive when I didn't know that. Being like similar to one of you guys, I was watching a YouTube video on how to hook everything up, and he used one wire straight to 12 volts, nothing else in it, and I went through 2 alternators before I figured out what was going on. One was the one it came with out of the auto wrecker, so I figured maybe just a bad alternator. The other one was a brand new one. Once I cooked that one, I kind of figured something was going on, and so there you go. Learn from my mistakes. I fixed it, and the Camaro, the alternator's been in there for a little over a year now instead of 3 weeks. So there you go. Yeah, so I'm going to wire that up, and then I'm going to be done for today. It's starting to get pretty late, so a little bit of soldering, some shrink tube, and then I'm out of here. So we'll see you guys tomorrow.